Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him, "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the good news of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated as we go in. John, as a character of his writing, when he recounts different things, he oftentimes will go into greater detail concerning the events that took place in Jesus' life, the conversations that were had, the different nuances that took place. And this is no different. And John's writing is meant to really make you think. You can hear stories in Matthew and Mark and Luke, and they can be kind of short and to the point. John, not so much. And John's intention of writing was to get you to think, to really think. Thinking is an activity that we don't give a lot of thought to. You notice that? We just kind of do it. You just turn on the TV and just let your mind go wherever it's going to go. And you don't even pay attention many times as to what exactly you're thinking. So thinking about what you're thinking is what Jesus calls us to do. It's called repentance. Change. You can't change anything unless you take a moment and think about it, right? If you're going in the wrong direction, you just don't decide to go in a ditch. You got to think about it. And Jesus has a way of getting his students, called disciples, his students, to think. Remember, he didn't have laptops or notepads or things like that, so he'll teach in ways that it just sticks with you because you can't help but think about it. He'll say things like, if your hand causes you to sin, do what? What, did you have to memorize that? No, it sticks with you. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. That just sticks with you. Now, this is an event in the same manner of teaching. In fact, he even remarks on it. This is happening for a purpose. Now, every single person in this story that has a conversation with Jesus regarding what's happening is struggling to come to some kind of understanding as to what's happening. Understanding things is a lot easier than understanding beings. Have you noticed that? I can understand how a car works much easier than I can an individual human being. You ever find yourself puzzled? Why? Don't even ask why. And so there's a lot of back and forth trying to figure out what it is that God is doing through Jesus. And see, this engagement of your mind is something that John starts in the very beginning of his gospel. Unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he begins his gospel saying, in the beginning, which is the very beginning, was the Word. Now, that Greek word that we translate in English as word is logos. It means logic. It means behind everything in the universe is a wisdom to it. It's not haphazardly. There's a purpose, there's a meaning, there's a wisdom that God has put into play. And Jesus embodies that wisdom. Many times we think of Jesus as a nice person. I'm sure he was. But it'd be very, very hard-pressed to find in our culture a common viewpoint that Jesus was the smartest man that ever walked the earth. I've said this before. Just ask people at work and so forth who they think the top 3 intelligent people are that have ever lived, and you probably won't hear Jesus. And that's a very huge misunderstanding. And so Jesus comes in as presented by John as bearing this wisdom that's not just a degree that allows you to perform certain functions in society, but a degree that brings with it life, abundant life. And in as much as there's so much to talk about in this story, where he says, I am the resurrection and life, and so on and so forth, what I'd like to focus on this morning is towards the end of the story, when all is said and done, and then the stone has been rolled away. And bear in mind, everything has been put into play absolutely perfect. He waits for 4 days. Jim, how long does it take before a body, without any kind of messing with the body, how long will it take before the odor kicks in? 2 hours. So 4 days would be a horrific odor, right? For those of you that don't know, Jim, what is the exact title of what you do? Cremations. So he knows what he's talking about. So he waits that long, just in case there was any doubt that maybe he had just passed out. Lazarus meaning. No, you're going to have a full sensory experience. He's going to smell. He's dead. And then, through Jesus' direct instruction, you see the power of his wisdom. Roll the stone away. And what he doesn't get a concoction, doesn't put together some kind of, cutting a chicken's head off or anything like that. He speaks. His word causes the dead to live. And he gives an example, a definite example, of what he teaches throughout all of John, which is, everything that I teach you has the same power and effect. Everything. It carries with it life. And so throughout all of this chapter, he speaks and instructs his disciples, those who are learning this truth. Now this is very important to understand. Not only what is taking place, but how it's taking place. Later on in a few chapters, he will say, he who loves me, or anyone for that matter, anyone who has my commands and obeys them, they are the ones who love me. Now it kind of sounds conditional, doesn't it? Because more commonly than not, our relationships with each other are somewhat conditional. So that if you're in, sharing a house with someone and you want them to do something, you'll say, well, if you love me, you'll run out and buy me a hamburger because I'm hungry. If you love me. Well, that's conditional. And, sometimes it's kind of cute, sometimes it's not. But that's how we do it. That's not what Jesus is talking about in John. He's saying, if you love me, in other words, if you are able to do what I command, it will automatically create the reality in which you will love me. And you cannot do what I command by pure effort alone. In other words, I'm commanding you to trust in God. You cannot do that on your own. You can intend to trust in God, but you can't completely trust in God. See, most of what we think and actually most of what we believe goes on inside our bodies and our minds without us even being aware of what we're even thinking. So, for example, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that most of you did not have to give a lot of thought and attention as to the directions to get to church this morning, right? You didn't have to go, okay, let me see. I'm going to have to take a left here and a right. It just goes on autopilot. And when you got up in the morning, if you took a shower, you didn't have to think about, okay, wait, turn on the hot first, okay, and then let that warm. You didn't even have to think about it. You just do it. And most of what has taken place already this morning, in terms of what you've done, you probably haven't even had to think about it all that much. In fact, when our thoughts become ingrained in our bodies and they become habitual, we call it sometimes our second nature. In fact, you'll sometimes even hear people say, man, I've done that so many times, I can do it in my sleep. And what does that mean? It means I'm not even conscious of what I'm doing. Now sometimes you can get in trouble. There's been times, as I get older, I'll walk into a room and, man, I don't even know why I'm here. Or sometimes if I'm not paying attention, I can do that driving. I get there and I get in front of the store and I'm like, I have no idea why I'm here. Why is that? Because my thinking just went under the radar. And see, thinking and the mind, changing the patterns of the mind is what Jesus focuses on greatly. We call it repentance. Understanding and our intention and all the aspects of the mind come into play with regards to what Jesus is teaching. And this is not an easy thing to do, to change the mind, to work with the mind, to pay attention. Remember I said, most of the time we don't even think about what we're thinking about. We just go on autopilot. And so Jesus calls to our attention our thoughts, what we think about, and calls us then to take what he teaches as truth and let that thought and that teaching not only come into our minds, but work its way through every aspect of our being, that we literally become that truth. And he says things as he's teaching that if you don't understand what his intention is, can be a little confusing. For example, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Well, what's that supposed to mean? Wait. Bread. Well, in this case, what do you do with bread? You eat it. You have to take it into your body, and it becomes your sustenance. It becomes what you live off of. It becomes your source of energy and strength, and if you put into your body bad sustenance, you can still function. Go ahead and try eating a whole plate of French fries. You can still function, but you'll function like, that's how you'll function. And so Jesus says in his statement, I'm the bread. You literally take what I'm teaching you and what I have embodied. This is not teaching that's abstract. I'm living it. Remember, Jesus didn't start his ministry till he was 30. He was living a common, ordinary life, but living that common, ordinary life in a supernatural way. And so he gives this to all who would like. It's available to everybody. That's why you can say, blessed are you who are poor. Because even in that situation, even in the situation of being poor, you have access to richness. Another thing Jesus will say is, in addition to the bread, and this we read not too long ago, maybe it was last Sunday, I can't remember for sure, but when he was talking to the Samaritan woman, he says to her, if you knew who it was, if you actually knew who it was talking to you, you could ask that person for living water. And this is the kind of water that once you drink of it, you don't go thirsty anymore. Thirst is a need. And you can go through your whole life and drink soda and coffee, and it would kind of do the trick. but it's not going to be like water. You ever have those dreams in the middle of the night and you're really thirsty, but you can't wake up, and so you're just dreaming that you're trying to get water? Oh, those are horrible dreams. And then when I wake up and I just reach over, I always have water next to the bed where I drink or sleep, because I'm just too lazy. I don't want to wake up and go all the way down and get some water and come up. But Jesus says that it's water, it's sustenance, you see. Now, if you don't understand this, then most of Christianity won't make any sense. And what will be left is simply rituals, tradition, and culture, and entertainment. Boy, I hope they sing a good song today to really move my feelings. But if you get this in Jesus' words, you'll do greater things than I've been doing. Now in chapter 14, he actually says this. In chapter 14, Jesus says that if you keep my commands, you'll do greater things than what I'm doing. Now, do you think that's accurate for today's church? Are we doing greater things than Jesus? It's just a question to ask ourselves. And he goes on to say, because I'm going to the Father, when I go to the Father, I will ask whatever you want, I'll do for you. Now, either Jesus is absolutely lying to us, which, if that's the case, let's just call it a day and say we're done with this guy. Or he knows what he's talking about. And how is it that he can say in chapter 14, if you continue this, I'll do whatever. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me, anyone who has confidence in me will do what I've been doing. He goes on. He will do even greater things than these, because I'm going to the Father. Now, it's not really, I don't think, anyone's fault. It's just that for about the last 75 years or so, we have drifted so far from discipleship that we don't even recognize it, and it seems like a foreign thing. For example, how much time this last week did you spend in meditation? Meditation? No one has time for that now. Okay. What is meditation? Meditation is when you take the Word of God, you place it before you, and your mind becomes absorbed in it, you memorize it, and you internalize it, and it becomes part of your being. That's what it is. Back in the day, it was not uncommon for people to memorize whole books of the Bible. It's not hard. In fact, some of us here are old enough to remember that when we were growing up, just memorization as a practice in and of itself was common. Remember that? Now, and think about that. Most people beyond a certain age can go back and call out of their memory their address and phone number of where they grew up. Have you noticed that? 2685 103 St. Court West, Rosemont, Minnesota 55068. It's deep down, and I haven't lived there for 82 years. Now, if you were to ask me what Sequoia's number would be, I don't know, I got to look on my phone. Now, I don't even read the scriptures, I just have to have it up on a screen. Do you see where we're going with this? And so the curse, if you will, of modern American culture is really superficiality. And you cannot replace meditation or prayer with lighting a candle or watching a TV show, or even going to see what's now what we have is Christian entertainment. We got to be entertained. Otherwise, we don't know how to get it in there. And see, these are things that are very key to Christian life. There's many of them. Jesus himself practiced going into solitude. Well, that's something that we just can't do in our culture. We have to party. You see, if you want to think about this is very important to understand, because it wasn't too long ago that the social institutions supported Christian discipline, whether they understood it or not. They at least supported it somewhat. For example, how many of us can remember where on Sundays no stores were open? And do you know why? Because it was meant for meditation and prayer. And now that the stores are open, we have a society that is so tired. And I've seen this happen time and time again. Whatever service, whatever thing I'm teaching, as soon as the word starts being preached, people feel that peace and this. Why? Because it's so peaceful. In fact, I'll even say that when Jesus gets towards the end of chapter 14, he says, "Peace I leave with you." Peace. Rest. In Hebrews it says, let's not enter his rest. There's a rest for the people of God. The people of God don't have to keep on. And so we just can't wait to retire because we're so tired. So we're going to do it all over again. We're going to retire. Now this is very good. This is very, very important stuff to understand in discipleship. And so when all is said and done and he speaks the word, we see what happens. The power of his word is such that it brings back the dead to life. I was amazed when I was first reading about Martin Luther. And Martin Luther, now I'm going to think about all the stuff that you have to do in your life. And this probably feels in some ways overwhelming if you think about it. Anybody feel overwhelmed with what's going on in their life right now? I do. Now I want you to think about if there was a price on your head, that there was literally a government agency that was out to get you. And then I want you to think that without a computer, without electricity, without the modern technology being what it is, only with a pen and an ink pen and paper, that you would learn Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek, and then translate the entire Bible into your language. And in addition to doing that, you're also going to have a regular preaching schedule, and you're going to write 35 additional books. And when asked about it, Martin Luther said, "I have so much that God has asked me to do that I cannot imagine ever getting it done without 2 hours of prayer a day." Now is that where we are? No. It's not where I am. And that's probably not where most Christians are. We want practical messages. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's so much more. Now, the thinking of the world is, I don't have time for this. That's common. You know that thought that comes into your head that says, I don't have enough time? That's the one that comes in. I don't have time. Well, okay, you can go ahead and listen to that, but the end result will be what you get. And Jesus makes this truth. And see, this is one thing that's so powerful about this, is he is setting before them truth that will give them life, truth that will give them a strength. The very God who raised Jesus from the dead, who created the entire universe, desires to have an intimacy and is a source of resources that is unimaginable. And yet, in our persistence, we will continue to try to live life only on the resources that we see are available to ourselves, and not desire the dependency that God asks of us. See, dependency is not a desired thing. Do you like being dependent on other people? Primarily because other people will let you down. And they cannot, for the most part, be relied upon. And so dependency is not a good state. And yet dependency is what Jesus modeled constantly. And even goes on to say, trust in God. for everything. Before Jesus, Solomon, trust in God and lean not on your own understanding. Don't try to figure it out, in other words. Acknowledge that he is God and that he has your back and that he's as good as what Jesus says he is, and he'll direct your way. But see, that mindset is something that is not natural to a human being. And that's why we work with God to transform our thoughts. As Paul says in the 12th chapter, therefore, brothers, be transformed by what? Going to church. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is the way that Jesus teaches us to do it, putting his thoughts and his reality into our minds, that we can live life without limits in dependency with God, in trusting in God. And see, all this you can see is playing itself out in chapter 11, where people are trying to figure out, it doesn't make sense. Lord, why didn't you do, when we told you our brother was sick, why didn't you fix it? You ever have that happen in your life, where something happens, you don't like it because you don't get what you want? And the thing about this story that's so powerful is there is nothing, I don't think, that's any more emotional, spiritual, physically draining than to go through the death of a loved one. Emotions run high, very high. When someone is dying and the strain that it puts on somebody. Remember, it didn't say that Lazarus just died. He was sick and on his way to death. Have you ever been with someone who is in decline? It is draining. And the more drained that you feel, the more raw your emotions become. And the more raw your emotions become, your mind begins to drift over here. And you can just drop a pen and go off on people. Or you can break down and cry. Or a memory can come up in your past. But caring for someone who is sick and ill to the extent that they are going towards death is a drain on any human being. And it's this kind of scenario that Jesus enters into. And not only does he enter into it, he feels what they feel just as much. He weeps. Now, think about that. Jesus knew. His Father revealed to him what was going to happen. Why would he weep? Because of the intimacy. There's nothing more painful than to have somebody you love go through something. And even if you know it's going to be okay, even if it's a kid and you know they're going to be okay. I remember when I was a kid, and I have, if you don't know, I have allergies pretty bad. And back in the day, when we still had candles and we didn't have light bulbs and all that kind of stuff, they do an allergy test, and you would have to lay down on a flat surface. How many people know what I'm talking about? Okay. And in order for them to be able to determine what you're allergic to, they take a little pin and they put a little of the amount of whatever it was that you might be allergic to. Maybe it was pollen of this plant or pollen of that, and then they would prick your back. And I didn't know what was going to happen to me. So my mom said, just do what the doctor says. And I took my shirt off, and I wasn't ripped like I am now, but back then, I was a kid. And so I laid down, and he started pricking, and it just hurt. And halfway through, I just started crying. I was trying to man up, but the tears were just coming down. And I looked in the corner, and there was my mom, just crying. Well, why does she have to cry? She knows I'm going to get over it. No, because there's such a connection, you see. An intimacy. That's an intimacy that is foreign to us. Because we live, remember, it goes back to thoughts, in the same way that Eve mistrusted God and instead believed God to be either a liar or not good, and therefore that's why she ate. because she didn't feel she could trust God. The result of that mentality from then on between human relationships is one of fear and blame. If you see it play out in chapter 4, Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the serpent, and all of them are scared of each other, of God. And I think it's fair to say that's pretty much the condition of our world. We are afraid of one another. We can't we don't go out at night. Can't go out at night. Why? Because another human being just might harm you. You see how far, and if you don't even think about how far we've come in our thinking, you just think that's normal. You don't even realize that's a perversion of creation, to harm one another. And very quick to blame. Very quick to blame. Yesterday, we had rehearsal in the afternoon. I was kind of tired, so I grabbed a tall coffee. I don't know what it is with tall coffee cups at Starbucks, but they don't contain the coffee that well. They leak. And so I'm drinking it. Drip, drip, drip. First thing, who should I blame? Who should I blame? I want to blame someone. I want to take it back. Where do we get, whoa. How did we get here? But see, that's all a result of not thinking and embodying the reality of the kingdom of God. And we're quick to that. Have you noticed that? And then we can do that. We can treat each other harshly because it's business. So you can just go up to someone and just ream them a new one. And that's okay because they're professional. No, it's not okay. We're human beings, you see. And all this is in play in this 11th chapter. And to pretty much summarize it for today, because there's a lot to think about. And in fact, I invite you to take chapter 11, at least the first 45 verses that we've just read, and memorize them. And allow the Spirit of God to use this account to teach you things, because He will. But Jesus makes a very profound statement regarding His disciples. He says, you know what? The world will know that you're my students by one thing, and only one thing. And it's not by how often you gather, because you can gather a lot. It's not by how busy you are, because people can get really busy. And it's really not even how nice you are, because a lot of groups are nice. They'll know that you are mine by how you love each other. And I will intentionally place you in groups that contain people that you don't like. Just like I did with my first 12. I specifically picked out 12 people that not everybody got along, to demonstrate to the world that if you are with me, you can change your very being to that of love. That the love of God that pervades my body and my being, you too will experience. And in so doing, in the 14th chapter, Jesus says, peace I leave with you. You don't have to be, the wrath of God is many times the wrath of human beings. And you got to think about that. But, and Jesus, when you take a look at Jesus experienced God's wrath on the cross, God didn't put him up there. We did. Our wrath did. We are very quick to kill one another. And if it's not physical, it's just emotional. And if it's not emotional, it's just through contempt. But either or, once God transforms us into being like Him, our nature's just changed. We just don't have the same nature we used to. And there's much more to be said about that, but I'm going to stop with that.